Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, formerly carried on the Starcom radio network, now carried on, as I said, YouTube, because schedules are hard. And I am here joined with another person who also understands that schedules are hard and how difficult it is to create audio content for people. Our own favorite disembodied voice, Bobby B.
Hey, everybody. I'm not going to do the whole Mustache Mafia thing and bore you guys to death with it because I don't want it to get tired, but happy holidays, joyous Kwanzaa, my brothers and sisters, happy Christmas, happy New Year, Merry Hanukkah, Eos Saturnalia, and whatever else you celebrate.
Absolutely. Now, Bobby, you've been on to do a number of debate breakdowns, and you've been kind enough to watch and subject yourself to all of the debates that I've done. These are, of course, wildly popular debate breakdowns that we do. We're bigger than Chapo.
I really need to lose weight.
We both do. I'm telling you what. It was weird that lockdown, I originally lost a bunch of weight at the beginning of lockdown. I think because I was building a chicken coop by hand. And then, like, when the chicken coop was built, and I've just been kicking around the house and writing, and I haven't been able to do karate because of COVID. Like, I think I put on some pounds.
Yeah, man, same here.
Yeah. So that's has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about today. We are going to talk about the debate that I just had with the noted, I guess the best way he describes himself as a reactionary, so right-wing reactionary YouTuber, the Distributist, the debate that we just did. And Bobby, you just sent me, like right after this debate, you sent me a clip. And this is the clip that he sent to me to describe his reaction to watching the debate. So hang on, I'm going to share my screen for just a second here. Share screen, yeah. Bobby, are you seeing my screen?
I am seeing you.
You're still seeing me. It's because this thing came up. I'm going to share my entire screen, share audio. Okay, are you going to share this thing? Maybe I can do application window. No, that's what we had before. Thank you. Tab.
For while we waited, it's a wonderful clip of the I believe he's an Academy Award winning actor, Christopher Walken.
Yeah. Clip of Christopher Walken from what is this from exactly?
From a 1996 full motion video game that I think I'm one of like 4 people in North America who remember, called Ripper.
Right.
But I can do my impression if we can't do it.
No, we'll I think we'll get it. I pulled this up in an alternate browser window here, and then I will share it as soon as this thing lets me. Isn't live stuff amazing? Okay.
This
was going to come off so well, and everybody was going to be.
It was going to be great.
Yeah. So. Technology. All right. So now I'm going to go to screen share. Yeah, screen sharing is that yes. Don't show me these tips. Share screen. Application window. Here we go. So here's what.
Oh, now it's going. Oh, now I can't hear the audio. I don't think the audio came across, but
the audio did not come across.
But you can see what he's saying in the title, and that is exactly how I felt watching this entire debate. I was telling Brenton before we started this that he messaged me to do this while I was smoking cigars in a cigar lounge downtown where I live, and I was listening to it on the way home, and I'm like, no, wrong. Like, I looked up the guy's Twitter a minute ago, and I don't know anything about this guy. I haven't heard about him before now, but he actually says he's like counter enlightenment, and I'm just like, oh God, this is just going to be pain. This is going to be
he's into like how do you say it, like mendacious or mendanicus mold bug? I'm going to pop that so that people can get the full context of the Christopher Walken quote. I'm popping that into the chat.
yeah, listen to it. It's great. It's Academy Award winning actor right there.
In an FMV game, because we know that FMV was the future of the industry.
Oh, it totally was. It totally was. Play that game if you get the chance, and if you can run it on a modern system, it's terrible. But
so the Distributist, and we do have a question in the chat. Is the Distributist a fash? So I think I can answer this in that I'm very specific with what I label as fascist. So I'm not going to, from what I have encountered about him, and I've actually talked to him twice. I did like a minor debate with him, like kind of a low key one, immediately after he had his famous yelling match with Vaush. Oh,
I gotta look that up.
Oh yeah. Not a lot of communication goes on. Vaush just pretty much yells at him until he gets off the channel. But I would not consider him fascist. I would consider him definitely a reactionary. And I think that there are some positions he overlaps with fascists, and they're in like the same kind of community. But I feel like it would be a little. I think it would be a little premature to conclude these effects. That would be like kind of saying that, like, I don't know, to call a tank, to act like tankies and anarchists are the same people and have exactly the same values. But that's my feed on the situation. I could be wrong because, fascists are liars. But he seems to be at least genuine in some of the stuff. So
he was getting awful close with the immigration stuff. That'll be my take.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And we'll kind of get into that with the debate overall. And I did kind of call him out on it.
Yeah,
but so why don't you tell me what's your opinion on the debate? How did we go? And just what was, besides being Christopher Walken in that MV, like what was your reaction?
Well, the thing about even like kind of having this debate now is it's important to do these conversations. I think you're fucking doing God's work, just doing these things. But sorry for the curse words, kids.
No, it's fine. Shakabuku, man.
but this debate, should we have more or less democratization in society? It's largely been settled for like 250, 300 years of thinking, especially in what we consider the West, which is a placeholder in a whole nother conversation. And like the arguments that he's putting forward, I know he says counter-enlightenment on his Twitter, are arguments that were thoroughly debunked during the Enlightenment. I thought your opening was actually really great. I did Lincoln Douglas debate at a competitive level in high school, not high school, college. Colleges and high schools pretty much the same thing these days. But the thing that I didn't like about that is people, one, did the Ben Shapiro fast talk, and two, didn't really prepare really great affirmatives like you did in this one. So that was a great move. He obviously hadn't prepared an affirmative, and I'm like, here it comes. But just the premise of it is, I'm the whole time through this debate, I'm thinking like, if we're doing more versus less democratization in society, if you think of working with machines, I work a lot with machines. I'm developing land right now, and I have to constantly fix machines. The better a machine is, the fewer points of failure it usually has, the more reliable it is. So if we're trying to build a more reliable society, a more equitable society, we're never going to probably have a perfect society, certainly not in either of our lifetimes, definitely not the way with the way I smoke. We want as few points of failure as possible. And when you democratize a structure, you're distributing those points of failure to everyone. So instead of in an oligarchy having, say, like, I don't know, 5 or 10 lords lording over a state, you have, 100,000 people as points of failure in society. You're going to have a more reliable society. We've seen that clearly since the advent of popular sovereignty. You brought up the English Civil War. That was kind of the beginning of it. And to hear him argue against that and contradict himself a few times, which I'm sure we're going to get into.
Yeah.
It's really weird to hear this in 2020. And I know there's the whole current year thing, but like, it's the equivalent of having somebody argue like, should we have the high priest of Saturn control the calendar? Like, no, obviously not. We've figured that out like a few thousand years ago. But I guess one of the things about having a plural and open society and having a plural and open internet is that you're going to get more of these ideas communicated to more people than like the 4 people that might believe it in your state before the internet. So that's what makes, with this meandering point, these conversations incredibly important, because you get to kind of address these kind of, I don't want to say monstrous, but like very, very incongruous ideas with modern society.
Well, the thing is that, so I had been the one to suggest democracy as a reason, and the reason why was he had posted a critique of democracy on his channel that I watched, and
I'm not watching that.
Oh, yeah, you don't have to. You've got most of his points from it in the debate. But I've been looking for a reason to debate him for a while. I have a friend who has been bugging me to debate him. He was the guy that originally pushed me to pick a fight with him on Twitter and then debate him after the thing with Vosh. And so anyway, I was just trying to come up with like a topic on stuff. And originally I had suggested that we do something like tradition versus liberty. But he had a weird position on tradition where he said he considered it more of an intelligence system. So I figured like, okay, well, and what I had seen was with regard to the country where we are right now, you've got the Republicans who have been ruling as a minority party the entire time that Trump's been in, and, you know, have not won the popular vote most of the times. And there's a lot of policies that are currently carried out, you know, that are very unpopular policies. So the main issue that, by the way, in our comments here, we have Brenton is the high priest of Saturn.
Well,
I can go with that.
It is Saturnalia, brother.
Yeah. And there's too much neoliberal wokeness in your swag, unfortunately. What do you mean, my swag? My Appalachian Trail necklace or my Viking torque? I don't know if that's really neoliberal or woke.
Yeah, the Vikings totally invented wokeness and neoliberalism. You didn't know?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, anyway. I'm
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So anyway, I was like, okay, you know, this is clearly something that's in the zeitgeist, and it's something philosophical that I do want to talk about, because you do, I can't tell you how many times I've seen some freaking idiot share that like democracy is 2 wolves and a sheep fighting about, like, voting about what's for dinner. Yeah. And you know, so with regard to where the culture is right now, there's what I wanted to do was to just take that moment, and that seemed to be like a good point of contention between the two of us. So I suggested the democracy as the basis, and you'll notice that I think that, you know, regardless of how specific you know, the distributist politics are, I think at the base of it, you'll see a lot of very common conservative assumptions about the world. Yes. And that was one of the things that I really like to get into. I also will say, to his credit, he did engage the debate in good faith, in my opinion. And it's very rare that you will find someone who will do that. So, you know, I want to put that on there as a corollary. I felt like it was a friendlier debate than I've had. I felt like we were less a competitive debate where we were trying to, you know, score points and stuff, and more we had like an in-depth discussion about it, or at least that's what it felt inside my head. What did you feel on that?
Yeah, I think he did engage it in good faith, so much as his ideology will allow him to do so. And I think that's important. Like, I think he really did come to it thinking that he was going to have a dialectic. The problem is that the actual critical examination of his ideology and his positions doesn't lead to a good outcome for him.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So he contradicts himself a few times, saying that he's not against democracy, but he wants like local squires to be in charge unelectedly. That argument is crazy when you examine it critically. Like, really, like, you don't get to think.
To be fair, I will say that's somewhat of an extrapolation. He didn't necessarily say that he wanted like local squires in charge. He said that the relationship you would have with a local squire, or, you know, somebody that you actually knew in your community, would be stronger than your relationship with an elected official, which there's something to be said for that if we steel man that position.
I mean, but we've tried it in history and it didn't work. The local squire just doesn't. He's accountable not to the people he governs, but to the next guy ahead of him in the nobility structure. So when you had knights and squires governing towns, they governed towns for the benefit of themselves in the hierarchy, not for the benefit of the people. And when you get popular sovereignty, I mean, the beginnings of it obviously were still very much rooted in aristocratic values, but when you start to get popular sovereignty and erode that power, you do get a government that's much more accountable to the people. We saw this in England with Charles II. You mentioned Cromwell. You see how that can go very wrong with a strongman, which you mentioned also in this debate, where the popular sovereignty uprising gave way to Oliver Cromwell's dictatorship, which was disastrous for England. But
even worse for Ireland.
Yes, much worse for Ireland. England out of Ireland. But I'm trying to address this as gently as possible. I'll address this. His historical examples were also really, really shaky, and it was disappointing because you can actually steelman the position like you're talking about. But when he talks about George Washington becoming president via a coup, that's a vast misrepresentation of what actually happened at the founding of this country.
I figured. I haven't looked into that, but as I mentioned, I've read People's History of the United States. I guarantee you that if George Washington had carried out a coup that could be justified like that, freaking Howard Zinn would have.
And I'm someone who will criticize George Washington at length, but what happened when Washington became president, and it actually goes against his point, so I kind of wanted to go into this with you, is that we had the Articles of Confederation. The system that they set up was not working. There were crazy things that were going on under the Articles of Confederation. Here's a good example. Rhode Island had its own currency. Each state had its own currency. And it was a very, very low-valued currency. But they had set an exchange rate for the other currencies and threatened to actually execute anyone who didn't honor that insane exchange rate. So that's not a workable system, if that makes sense. So what happened was democracy through a democratic process, not a perfect and certainly not the most liberal democratic process we've ever had in this country, came together, did the Constitutional Convention, and appointed George Washington president through a democratic representative process. So when he says that democracy leads to degeneration, he provided an example of a democratic structure correcting itself through a democratic process, whereas the monarchy that we rebelled against, because it was more under the control of King George. Of course, there was the Parliament. England is a little complicated. But that system would not correct itself because it was under the influence of the king. And that led to a brutal, destructive war that lost England 13 colonies and almost its status as a superpower. So it's mind-boggling to me that someone would argue seriously against greater democratization of society.
Well, I mean, a lot of it really is this. So I think there's kind of two problems here. One is that the American system of democracy is kind of garbage. I think we all know it. And I would say it's garbage because it is not democratic enough, as opposed to being too democratic. But, I think a lot of the time when you hear someone objecting to democracy, what they seem to object to is someone having a simple majority and then being able to run roughshod over people who don't agree. And I think, there's something to be said for that in the sense of the Electoral College, for instance, when, you've got essentially a minority party ruling a country that the majority of the people in the country don't want them. You also have everybody getting swept up in really big national politics that ultimately, their voice isn't even that well heard, and the whole thing just becomes a what's it called? I guess a spectacle, more of a spectacle than an actual political process. So that was sort of oftentimes when I choose to have a debate, I will be choosing it because there's something specific that I want to talk about. And I know more people will pay attention to the debate because it's competitive and fun, as opposed to me just talking at people.
Right. And sometimes it's great to expose people's audiences to new ideas too. So your audience was able to actually understand the crazy things that are going on in the right zeitgeist through listening to this. His audience, maybe you reached a couple of them because you kind of stomped him in this debate. So maybe somebody will have that road to Damascus moment. But you guys got kind of off topic on property, but I did want to bring that up too. The democratization of property. Marx famously said that capitalism was a transitional state between feudalism and socialism. But the democratization of property coming out of feudalism vastly improved the economy of Europe and the world. The more people have access to property, have access to capital, and instead of having it controlled by a small unelected class of people, the better that works for everybody. And to hear him argue against that was a really weird thing, because I'm used to the right being hyper-capitalistic and wanting to democratize things. And I wonder if he would address that if it was brought up, but I'm only speculating here. The other bit I wanted to bring up is that you guys talked for a minute about the Renaissance and how he was saying that was a stable time. The Renaissance was not a stable time. Look up some history of the Italian Peninsula. There was constant warfare. He was talking that there wasn't like brutal ethnic cleansing. I just watched a documentary on Michael the Brave, who was a Romanian kind of nobleman. The Ottomans and the Romanians and the Hungarians were burning whole cities to the ground and massacring everybody in them during their wars. The difference between what happened in the 20th century and what happened in the Renaissance and feudal era is that the people who were going to war back then didn't have the industrial capacity to carry out horror on an industrial scale. Napoleon, I had a history teacher who called him Hitler without tanks. Those wars were killed millions. It's not wrong. That's the weird thing about it. But those wars killed millions of people, and the only reason they weren't as destructive as World War II is because they didn't have mechanized means of massacre at that point. But the era that you brought up was the Pax Romana that happened famously after Augustus up until I think the crisis of the 3rd century is when people say it ended. There's your little nerdy history lesson for the day, guys. But the problems with the Roman Empire and the Principate at that point were becoming manifest because the Romans built their world beater civilization basically by instituting a republic, which was for the time, radically democratized system. Nowadays we'd view the Roman Republic as a brutal militaristic slave state and not desirable. But when they established the Principate, like I was saying earlier, they moved from having multiple points of failure, having a custos honorum where people would develop into leaders through a democratic process, being elected to senatorial offices and given increased responsibilities by the will of the people, to having the Principate where you have a single imperial point of failure for the entire empire, which if you've read Roman history, you highlight the weakness of that when you get people like Caligula, Nero, Commodus. You get the awful emperors, and you see the massive failure of the undemocratized Roman Principate. And again, it's like he's bringing up these historical examples without context. There's a famous. I'm sorry, I'm shotgunning because I'm so like mystified by this a little bit. He also brings up Chesterton, who he is right was a great advocate of democracy, but Chesterton talked about in the era that he was writing. I believe that was like the late 1880s. He was a contemporary of C.S. Lewis, so I guess that was in the 20s.
Yeah, Alan Watts, who I was channeling pretty hard. And in fact, I listened to a few of his essays to build my essay. That's where I got the Richard III quote, the idea to use that, because he'd used a version of that in something where he was arguing for something slightly different. But I loved that bore through and farewell King.
Well, Chesterton wrote about, and I couldn't find the exact quote, but he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, that we think of the degradation of our society that we have now, but we don't remember the great poisoning princes of the Renaissance. So, like, as bad as our democratically elected leaders are, we don't have these Machiavellian oligarchs playing a game of chess with the people anymore. And again, I'm kind of mystified that it is a serious position now that we should have less democracy. And the whole debate, I'm wondering, and maybe you picked this up, but I didn't, what his alternative to democracy was.
Yeah, he didn't really elucidate that, which I was hoping he would do more. It seemed like he was more simply arguing against my position, which was a bit frustrating because it would have been nice to have gotten into more how he would have structured society. Because I was one of the things, and again, what I liked was his point, what he described as, and I don't know if the use of the term is accurate, but the thing that started with an S that was taken from Catholic social justice.
Yeah, I've been trying to think of that same word.
Yeah, like that really sounds a lot like anarcho-communism. Like it seems, if I'm, again, he defined it very, very quickly, but the sort of the hyper localization of politics within a geographical area, kind of, and then building out from there. I think in a lot of ways is how you might do some kind of, in a post-state society, how you might go about building a truly, communist society.
Absolutely, but the problem with his position that we need less democracy or having local squires then is that instead of having local communities governed democratically, you have essentially warlords asserting authority over areas. And while they might be local, to go to his point, which I firmly disagree with, the ruling classes in the kind of societies that I think he's advocating, because again, his position is not super clear, they certainly don't share the same quote-unquote culture as the local masses. Knights certainly didn't exist in the same culture as the peasants that they ruled over. And when you have people exercising that kind of top-down control without consent, you get conquerors.
Well, not only that, but how could you even do that except via a state? Like, you need a centralized state.
Oh, the kind of system that would be necessary to not be democratized has to be based on violence. And we know that because, I mean, we've had Locke, like almost 400 years ago, point this out, that if you don't have the consent of the governed, you have to have something to use against them. And that's the beauty part of democracy, is that while not everybody likes the system, you have 300 million people and a number of them did not vote for the person that we've elected president, you do actually have the consent of the people to live under the system, instead of having something along the lines of totalitarianism, which you have innumerable examples of throughout history, where the ruling power has to have something to use against the people, and that's usually a military force. And it's interesting that he brought up like misinformation and framing of things. I think you'd address that very well, but I just wanted to kind of touch on this a little bit, because it's 2020, and as much as I don't want to bring up Adorno and the culture industry, I freaking have to every day, and it's getting really frustrating. So, but like the problems that he's highlighting are not a problem with democracy. It's quite the opposite. When you talk about like misinformation and framing things, it's not the result of democracy. It's the result of an undemocratized culture industry that's based on capital. Fox News or OANN or whatever, Newsmax or whatever the failed right-wing network is going to be in the next year, Trump News probably. They don't exist because of the consent of the people. They exist because they're able to sell people a product that they buy for the benefit of capital.
Yeah.
And you buy their product by watching their ads and looking at their news coverage all the time. So again, that's a problem he brought up with democracy that's actually solved by democratizing things. Because if you democratize the culture industry, you're not going to get the control by small capital interests that are only interested in selling you their next fix. And you touched on that because he was kind of meandering at that point, so you guys didn't get to go into it in detail.
Yeah, well, I mean, with regards to, it's really interesting with regards to the democratization of the culture industry, because as somebody who I'm a professional artist, professional writer, I create culture.
Work in it, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that drove me to become a radical was moving to New York City and working as a small-time artist that nobody knew in this giant city of 9 million people, and seeing how things actually do get done in the traditional artistic systems that we have. So I'm not working in Hollywood or anything, but I'm working in the New York theater scene, and I'm looking at what actors winning what awards and which playwrights are coming out on certain stages, and and I'm looking at what their last name is. And I'm suddenly very quickly realizing, like, oh, this is a world of princes and peasants, and they're just not going to let me into their club. Like, and it takes a little while to learn that, because I think in our society we're very much taught about like the marketplace of ideas, and so like, you know, I really had to struggle to get my work up in front of audiences and critics and everything. And when I got the money together, when I was able to do that, and I did very well, you know, audiences responded. But there was this huge amount of disincentivization, because I had to basically struggle and beat my head against a wall just to get a couple plays up in New York, you know, over the course of the 10 years I was there. Now, since coming out of New York, you know, I've recently had a lot of success on Kickstarter with regards to my comics. And, you know, there were higher people in the culture that needed to initially sign off on that. But again, this is very different from like a studio system. Or you know, the sort of academic, the sort of quasi-academic system that American theater runs on, where certain universities produce, allow certain people in, produce certain graduates, and then these people are plugged into the kind of community that you need to get produced, you know, on the regional level and above. And so, like, you know, as I did this, one of the things that with Kickstarter, and it's absolutely not perfect, but it very much democratized the ability for me to get this work out there, because essentially, you know, the way Kickstarter works is people are pre-ordering the comic. By the way, Snow White Zombie Apocalypse running for another 9 hours on Kickstarter. We just crossed $22,000, and we've got a stretch goal at 25,000, where I will create a special coin to send out to everyone from Snow White's kingdom. Yeah, it may be magic. It's probably magic. In fact, assume that I told you it's magic. Don't bring that up again, and definitely not in court. You know,
did you see? This is kind of off topic, but did you see that the Disneyland security force in California is handing out military-style challenge coins?
Oh God!
I'll send you an image after this.
Please do, do. Disney. But yeah, my point being though is that to get your play produced in New York, you have to, like, just even on the off Broadway level. I think the first play that I had to scrape together $7,000 to lose to get that into the Fringe, and to rent the theater space and to actually put that stuff on. And that's like scrimping and saving and begging and borrowing for everything that you've got. $7,000. Similarly, like after that, you know, my plays were produced on, you know, $10,000, $12,000 budgets, coming, you know, and then of course it runs for 2 weeks and then it's gone forever because theater does not really work. But Brenton definitely ghost wrote Among Us the musical. Is there an Among Us the musical?
I would watch that.
I would watch that too. I should maybe, if there isn't an Among Us the musical, I should make that.
you got to have a sad clown spaceman do the Pavarotti the Pavarotti Puccini, or whatever the sad clown's name is, I forget.
Yeah, but anyway, my point being in all of this is to not just whine about you know, the struggles of being an artist in a capitalist society. And if you want to see me whine about that, actually read my play Mike, about the East Village open mic scene, because I really go into it in there. In fact, I paraphrased one of the monologues that I wrote when I said this is very much a world of princes and peasants. So, like, anyway, my point in bringing that up is all of those resources needed to be brought to bear to bring the stories that I had to tell and the kinds of perspective that I wanted to an audience. And and you got to think that the higher you climb up the chain, the more your work becomes a product as opposed to, you know, art and the work itself, and the more the more people you have to please. Either you're pleasing the artistic directors and literary departments of these major regional theaters, which are usually floated on like subscriber money and public grants and such, or so you kind of do the academic system there, or you're doing like Hollywood, which is essentially where you are getting your projects greenlit by people who like got into that position because they were really good at selling Pepsi, or like if you ever watch, did you ever see that show 30 Rock?
Yeah, I actually, God, for my sins, I love that show.
Yeah. So one of the people that taught me screenwriting, he pointed out that one of the truest things about 30 Rock is that the boss, played by what's the angry guy? He played
Baldwin.
Baldwin, yeah. The boss, that character that he plays, got in there because he managed a project that sold an oven that used 3 kinds of heat.
Yeah.
And someone said, okay, you get to run this TV network now because of your triple heat oven. And that's really how it is, like, as an artist in the industry. The people that make the decisions are completely removed from the artistic process. They're businessmen that have maybe read like one book on screenwriting, and they just got there because they made a lot of money in some other way.
It is, and that's the flaw of a non-democratized economic structure, is that, and we saw the great benefit of it at the founding of this country and through much of our history in politics, is that when you have an undemocratized structure and you have a elite class, I am not broken. Unbowed, unbent, unbroken. You are wrong, sir. I will never accept defeat. You have a small class of people that you can select leadership from, right? So in the Roman Principate, in the British monarchy, in the various feudal states, in the Renaissance kingdoms that were governed by the great families, you have this small group of people that you can select for different posts, and they're not always the best people to run those things. But when you have a democratized structure, you open up the avenues of power as it's necessary to everybody. So you have a pool, instead of, say, like, 1 million or 2 million people in positions to govern in America, you have a theoretical pool of 300 million people. And one of our big problems in this country, and I think that the Distributist brought this up without kind of realizing it, is that we have a political class that's very disconnected from the vast majority of people, because we select a very, very small amount of people to be able to govern. But if as we hopefully democratize going forward, we're going to get a broader cross-section of the country. AOC is the darling of the left right now in Congress. She was a bartender in New York, and she's a pretty good congresswoman. I think everyone listening to this will agree.
And she's really smart. I've said this before, but I actually met AOC. Like,
oh, did you really?
Before she was famous. She bartended at a place called Flat Fix or Flat Fee. It's, if you watch one of the best things about living in New York, by the way, is watching like the Marvel TV shows and seeing like places I hang out in them. Like
Except when Daredevil says Hell's Kitchen is the roughest neighborhood in New York.
That is ridiculous.
There are charter schools and no Whole Foods there. It ain't rough.
Yeah. Hell's Kitchen would never allow riffraff like me in it. But but like Luke Cage, like I lived in Harlem. So like there's a scene in Luke Cage where he's standing in front of like the band shell in the park where I did the choreography, the initial choreography for Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, the play. Like I remember throwing my roommate over my shoulder, like in that literal shot. But anyway, like kind of my point, beyond plugging my Kickstarter in the last couple of minutes, is that the whole society disincentivized someone like me from being able to actually express themselves in a way like that. Right. Both by forcing me to focus on another job as opposed to what I was doing, and then also by erecting these ridiculous entry barriers. Now, I'm not complaining about that. That's just something that happens. And in the way what we have with Kickstarter as a good example, and again, this is a neoliberal market-based solution, but talking strictly about the democratization of it, because it takes less capital and less connections to be able to bring your work directly to people, you're going to get more varied stuff. And of course, Kickstarter, I love it. One of my favorite things about Kickstarter, by the way, is that there's a ton ton of porn on it, and also a ton of empowered queer content. And usually when something like pops up in my feed, I sometimes I don't know what it is. Like, I'm like, wait a minute, is this porn or is this romance?
What's the difference anymore?
Yeah. But my point is, and I'm joking about it and kind of making a little bit of fun here, but when culture opens up, you get more expressions than what you do when you have it very shut down, and that then leads to only certain voices being elevated and projected, as opposed to others. And the in a capitalist society, the voices that are elevated and projected are the ones that make money. And how do you get into a position to be a voice that makes money? Well, you know someone.
or you replicate a similarly profitable product and then market it, which is another flaw with undemocratized economies, and something that can be ameliorated, if not solved, by further democratizing the economy as much as possible. And again, it's something that we've realized over history, like repeatedly, since like the 1700s when we started having this conversation, and even back during like the feudal era and the Roman era, you have constant assertions of political power by the working and lower classes. Spartacus is a famous example, where the Roman slave class had no representation, no say in society, no ability to exercise political power. And they revolted. There were multiple slave revolts during the Roman Empire. There were multiple peasant revolts during the feudal era. And having the franchise, even though it's the franchise in a country of 300 millions, which is an unbelievably large number, does give you political power. And something else that he brought up as I'm thinking about this is that he keeps talking about the evils of politics. One, everything is political.
Everything is political.
Everything. Like me smoking my cigar is political to some extent. And you're never going to.
Cigar? I hope it's a Cuban cigar.
I have like 5 in the humidor. I save them for special occasions. This one's Nicaraguan. Shout out to my Nicaraguan comrades who probably rolled this. But everything is political. You're never going to get rid of politics. And if you limit the democratization of politics to a small class of unelected people, or to a small class of eligible people to be elected, you're still going to have politics among those small classes, and you're still going to have the lower classes who are governed by them without their consent try to assert their own political power. And that's the beauty part of the democracies that we've set up over the last like 300 or 400 years, which are completely imperfect and need to be improved immediately, but is that we've given the franchise to every eligible citizen, and in the United States we've given that citizenship to everyone who's born here or everyone who wants to come here. And to hear him talk about like limiting immigration to like 1965 levels, what makes 1965 levels of immigration somehow ideal? The other thing is that you brought up brilliantly is that like there are whole swathes of immigrants who vote very conservatively. If you come to Florida, please take a trip down to Miami. It's a wonderful city, super expensive, full of Cuban immigrants who are super Republican.
A friend of mine from the theater world who has actually been like, we've been on very good terms for the most part. Basically, our entire relationship like completely decayed because she's one of those people that, Castro took my grandfather's estate. Like, and it's what's weird too about it. And it basically came down to it kind of over Bernie Sanders. Like, she's a Democrat, but absolutely no Bernie Sanders, and really had issues with me talking about like leftism, and she really wanted to try. I remember, it's funny because this actually does go right back to what we had at the beginning, where the people were like, is the Distributist a fascist? And I tend to be very particular with how I define fascism. And of course she sat there and insisted that Castro was fascist.
See, like you can make. You can't really make the argument that Castro is fascist. No. I don't, honestly. You can make the argument that some of his policies drifted towards the right. And I think when you're addressing the flaws of Castro, which there are many, the tragedy of Fidel Castro is that he had the opportunity to be like a Caribbean or Central American George Washington figure, where he liberated Cuba from an authoritarian dictatorship, and he had the opportunity to create a democratized structure in Cuba, and instead became something of a tyrant over his life. And that is a great tragedy of that revolution. To say that he's a fascist is, however, unfair.
Particularly when you consider the freaking Batista monster that came before him.
Yeah, he actually lived fairly close to where I'm living right now.
Batista did, or Castro?
Batista, when he was in exile. My grandfather's second wife went to school with his children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So were there angry spirits following that family around?
Ironically, her father built the Cuban Railroad and supported Castro. So it's like a whole weird thing. Yeah.
But my point being is, immigrants are not going to be like this voting army for the Democrats. But Republicans, there's a lot of Republicans who are not fascist, at least not consciously fascist, who do believe that. Who do believe that the Mexicans are going to come. And to a certain extent, I mean, demographics in Texas are changing. And I even brought this up. If the Republicans lose Texas, which they will inevitably lose Texas, if nothing else changes in a big way, it will make it mathematically impossible for a Republican to ever be elected president, as long as the Electoral College is around.
And as long as the dialectic remains stable, because something else that he brought up is that you inherit your politics, and there's nothing in your genes that transmits socialism. There's nothing in your gene or capitalism. There is an argument to be made that your local culture and your local material circumstances will influence your politics, but those circumstances change rapidly. Everything is subject to change in society, and you're right. Texas used to be a Democratic stronghold way back in the day, but it was conservative Democrats. But now it's a conservative Republican stronghold, and the urban centers in Texas are rapidly growing, whereas the rural areas are kind of shrinking in population in comparison to the urban sectors. So yeah, you're right. As long as urban sectors remain fairly quote unquote liberal, yeah, they are going to lose Texas, but there's nothing inherited about that. It's material circumstances. It's information you're exposed to. It's not like my parents were both. Well, actually, my dad's a hippie, but he's a weird conservative hippie.
Yeah.
But my mom,
a lot of that.
My mother's super conservative. I'm like as far left as you can get in America, more or less.
I mean, similarly with me, my dad was very conservative, and my family voted Republican the entire time I was coming out. That's one of the reasons why I started out as a young Republican, and now I'm a hippie anarchist. It's there's a lot of important experiences that got me to where I am. Part of it was college, because college teaches critical thinking, and particularly if you're studying theater, because to do theater properly, you need to learn empathy. And you need to be able to get into the heads of characters that you may even find disgusting or repellent, but still you got to be able, if you want to play that character, you need to understand them. And you need to understand them in a way as close to the way that person would understand themselves as you physically can. Same thing, with a writer. Same thing with, the big events that really pushed me to the direction I was let's see, the failure of the war in Iraq, the persecution by the Republican Party of gay people, which pushed me away from the GOP and towards the right libertarians in college, because I didn't hate gay people, and Bush was trying to make it so they couldn't get married, and I thought that was stupid.
Ron Paul 2008.
I never did that. Thank God, I was never a Ron Paul guy.
Okay, cool. I don't have to eviscerate you over
that. I spent a very brief period after I got out of college and immediately hit the workforce, where I was, working as a small-time actor in and around the Midwest, and in a variety of very abusive work situations. I remember one time I was working for a company. They had me working 60, 80 hours a week for no overtime and no benefits. And they're definitely cheating on how they did everything. But, we just put up with it. And it even got to the point where my parents would send me care packages and I would not be awake to receive them, because I would either be passed out in my apartment or at work, and nothing else. And so like we even joked like I won't say the guy's actual last name, but like we had to do shows during the holidays, and so it was like, please, Mr. Guy Man, it's Christmas. Like, we're sitting there performing like a version of A Christmas Carol, and those people are like, you be in here bright and early.
Well, it's funny you should bring that up, because it is around Christmas time as we're recording this, and A Christmas Carol shows like the brutal harshness of the undemocratized economic system that the British had at the point Dickens was writing, and the failure of a system that relies on one really rich guy to be nice to people, which is more of that, more of that. But you have Cratchit, whose son is going to die of whatever the disease that Tiny Tim has is, unless Scrooge decides to be nice. That's not a desirable system. Declaring somebody, okay, so my dad voted Republican from Reagan till W. Bush at least, but he's also in the Satchidananda yoga cult and lives up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. He does not like Trump. I've talked to him about that. He really hates Trump, but like super, like I think he was like a hippie at some point, but I don't get like a lot of.
Well, I'm literally the last yippie.
Yeah, you told me about that. Yeah, well, but like my dad just did a lot of LSD at Grateful Dead concerts and came from a very conservative Italian family, which is ironic because again, politics change over time in families. Because the original immigrants that came over here in the 30s from my family were socialists who came over from Sicily. My great grandfather actually has it on his.
I was born in Sicily.
Yeah, my family's from Syracuse. Yeah.
Technically, I was born in Naples, and then I grew up in Sicily the first 2 years of my life.
Oh, my father's mother's from Naples.
Oh, yeah. Watch your wallet around her.
yeah, absolutely. The Camorra is so much worse than the Mafia, but that's a whole nother conversation.
But yeah, so what essentially I think we're getting at here, and to tie it back into the debate, because I don't want to get too far afield from that, is that immigrants do not vote as a single block. And a lot of them are very conservative. They come from conservative countries and they don't want to make waves here. They want to come here because they like what's going on here and they want to fit in. Right. So like, yeah, the idea that the Democrats, that anyone coming from outside of this country, that the Democrats import will come in and overwhelm the country. Like he did say, I think in his opening statement, that like if we had open borders, India would come over here and take over the country.
That was really weird. Like obviously, the Democrats or any political party don't import immigrants. Economic circumstances in capitalism dictate the relatively free movement of labor, and the entire population of India isn't going to have the material resources to migrate to America, or B, the economic opportunity when they get to America to come and stay here and vote. Like,
nor would they necessarily want to.
Nor would they necessarily
like where they live.
A lot of Indians probably like living in India. It's like a weird fear that's almost like it's almost endemic to our culture, that kind of almost stems back to like the barbarians rushing the borders of the Roman Empire, which itself was a failure of an undemocratized, intolerant Roman Empire to integrate new peoples into their culture, which is another thing where democratization would have helped in history, because you keep coming back to these rigid, unelected systems, not based on the consent of the people, do not produce good results. As you democratize, you get better results, even though they're not perfect and they come with their own sets of problems.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a little fired up about this.
I can see why you would be fired up by it. And now to steelman his position a little bit, because I do think there is something to be said. We do know the whole political machine in New York, where essentially dispossessed communities like the Irish were used by Tammany Hall to maintain political power for their votes. I mean, you see that in Gangs of New York. But also, it's not like they could do that now, because now the Irish are part of American culture, and therefore they're not forced into this kind of voting and ideological block, Yeah.
I
think the answer there would be greater democratization, not less.
Yeah, you're right, and I just saw this in the comments that my family lore reminds somebody of the film 1900. Great film, but it's much more like Mario Puzo's Fortunate Pilgrim. But you're absolutely right, and again, the great irony is that like in New York, like you're mentioning, that the Irish have become super conservative over time, whereas when they came here, they were kind of to the left because they were Irish Republicans primarily fleeing the British.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that if we're going to talk about immigration, the ability of great societies, what we consider great societies, to integrate new people and new ideas is a mark of a society on the rise. There's a great book called Day of Empire that goes into this in great detail. But as societies become more insular and less able to integrate new people and new ideas, they tend to fall. Rome is a great example of that. As they Christianized and became less tolerant towards barbarians and pagans, you see what happened. The Mughal Empire started off as a very tolerant empire, became intolerant, fell. The Mongolians didn't allow people a path to becoming Mongolians, and there's a reason that empire doesn't exist anymore. And when we talk about immigrants like they're this evil that are coming over here like a plague of locusts, it's not a great mark for our culture. It's not something that's historically been a part of our culture. Well, I mean, hostility towards immigrants has always been a thing, but like the inability to integrate them is not a great thing. And again, democratizing a society, you get to integrate all of these people, and that's the thing. I'm a New Yorker originally. That's the great thing about New York is people like to talk about real America, but to me, New York City is real America because everybody comes there, everybody adds their little piece, but it's still essentially New York. You're still gonna get flipped off by a cab driver, whether it be 1853 and he's in like a hansom cab or 2020 and he's driving a Tesla.
Hey, I'm walking here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's been the refrain of New York forever. But
and New York, I really like. Again, New York is the city that made me into an anarchist.
Yeah.
But also like. And I think there is something to be said for cities that churn out progressives, but only progressives necessarily in the sense of like the Democrat Republican thing, because the Republicans have very much been a party of maintaining white supremacy. Yeah. They've been a party of maintaining these traditional, loci of power. Whereas if you live in a city, you meet a lot of other people. Like, it's very hard for me to believe, I never would have believed this, but like, well, actually, no, let's go back and I'm going to share one of the darker parts of my past real quick here. And this isn't really like a serious dark thing. This is just like a thought I had when I was younger. And this was like during, I guess, the fallout from 9/11. Like the first thing in the fallout of 9/11 that I actually worried about was I'd seen the movie The Siege. Yeah. And I'd worried that we would run into a problem that was outlined in The Siege where because of the terror, we would see our freedoms as citizens curtailed by an overbearing government. And wow, that was really on the nose, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, we didn't.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. But
the difference is The Siege didn't predict the marketing of it through media.
Yeah, well, and that became like kind of the issue. So as the country came together around war, I really, and I was a kid. I was a junior in high school and I still remember when the planes hit the tower because I saw it happen in my chemistry class, like. There was that whole period where I did like the Sam Harris thought experiment where you don't understand what's happening and you don't understand why somebody would attack like this. And you get this narrative of crazy hate from the Middle East. They just hate our culture and hate us because of their intolerant religion. And I never went as far as like Sam Harris, but I remember the thought did occur to like late teenage me, like, oh man, like what if we have to kill all these people, because I didn't have the analysis. So I guess kind of what I was getting at with that is the Republican Party overall maintains a lot of its power and a lot of its voting base by appealing to people who have not had a lot of experiences. And so as I got out into the world and I hiked the Appalachian Trail and I worked a regular job, I would be much less likely to believe that Muslims could be like a chaos goblin, because I walk down from my apartment in New York and I buy my breakfast sandwich from a Muslim.
Yeah.
Yeah. I recall the one that I bought it from was a little racist, but otherwise a good job.
Yeah, but and the problems in the places that produce the people who attack us can also kind of be tracked back to a lack of democratization in Afghanistan, which is a country I'm more familiar with than I'd like to be. It was a completely immiserated country through imperialist wars, but it was also a country that was ruled over by a brutal totalitarian regime, still kind of is, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And it produced people that had no hope, and so kind of carried out those attacks. It's a whole long conversation. I'm not going to go into that 2.5 hour thing, but like, again, it just always comes back to these structures that aren't democratic or democratized producing these awful results. And to hear in 2020 in America, which is, for all of our faults, kind of the cradle of liberal democracy in the modern world, to hear people arguing against democracy. And it's not only the distributist or cranks on media. We have mainstream people in the failed Republican Party. And I use the term failed Republican Party, even though they keep winning elections here and there, because their policies always fail and their ideology is a sham failed ideology. And I think it's important to point that out. But we have people in the mainstream GOP arguing against democracy. We have people screaming in the streets for unelected judges to overturn a popular election. And that's why having these conversations and highlighting the kind of absurdity of arguing against increased democratization is kind of very important. And I'm glad you did this, but I'm also kind of pissed that it ruined my nicotine buzz.
Now, on the notion of ruining your nicotine buzz, there were some people, and I always caution people on modern day debate in particular, to not read the comments if you debate, because they will have almost nothing to do with the actual debate itself. But I did go over some of the comments, and there was a guy who, I guess he was a Voshite, who was very, very angry that I did not handle the Distributist like Vosh did. And, again, as I said with Vosh, when the Distributist came on and talked to Vosh, they didn't talk to each other. They talked at each other, and then Vosh yelled at him until he left. And people that love Vosh see that and go, he won. But there wasn't any communication going on. And someone that would go and watch that as a Distributist fan is not going to be, inclined to approach this dialectically. They're just going to be like, here's this guy being a jerk to the guy that I like. So, but there were that guy and a couple of other people that seemed like they wanted this to be blood sports, and they wanted to go in there, and rather than listening and responding, they wanted me to basically shut this person down and make them bleed and humiliate them.
And that's kind of a function of us selling debate as a product instead of having debate as a dialectic anymore. You're going to get people on both sides, and it does happen on the left too, that just want to get their serotonin rush and see the other guy crushed. I'm not really super familiar with Vosh. I don't know. I've seen a couple of his videos. He seems like a decent dude, but if that characterization of it is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt that it is, then he's just selling that as a product. And the other guy is too. And Vaush, is it Vaush or Vosh? I'm sorry.
It's Vosh. I say Vaush because there's a U in it. Vosh. Okay. I've talked to Vosh on a number of occasions. Yeah. I would say I'm not one of the people who's on the Vosh bad train. Yeah. But I agree that with Raz's comment there that it was not a good conversation in my opinion. It wasn't what I was hoping to see when I logged in. I can see why people would think he really wrung him up to dry there. But yeah, and there was a weird generic argument for centralization, though I would say I don't know if that's so much it was one coming from Vosch's ideology. And that was more of one where I think he just felt compelled to continue to argue with anything the Distributist would have said. Because the Distributist kind of offered sort of an olive branch there, where he was talking about how communities should determine their own policing or something. And I think it was more of the, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, no, yes. I think he just instinctively shut down that idea, even though, he was essentially arguing for the opposite of an anarchist approach.
That does remind me of something, because you mentioned centralization. He mentioned in this debate, and this is like what actually, as that previous comment said, kind of quote unquote broke me, was he said that fascism is a cross between monarchy and democracy. That is, for anyone who's listening to this who doesn't know this already, that is completely not an accurate description of fascism. Fascism is characterized by a frustration with parliamentary politics and democracy in general, and the desire for a central strong leader. There's a reason that every fascist regime, Franco was like their leader. I forget what Franco's epithet was, but you get Il Duce, you get the Fuhrer, et cetera, et cetera. That fascism is in no way a product of democracy and does not come into power through democracy. So that was just straight up untrue. You didn't get a chance to really address that because you kind of moved on real quick after that.
Well, again, the debate was about democracy, not fascism. But fascism is a notoriously difficult ideology to define, which is one of the reasons why I do not hold the Distributist is a fascist from what I've seen, and why I'm very careful with what I call fascism, because there is that thing where fascism is just a snarl word that people use, but it's also a real thing, and fascists really exist. I thought for a second, because if you saw me kind of maybe even partially agree there, it was because when he was talking about it's a fusion between monarchy and I think what he was trying to express there, Franco. Franco was not fighting for the kind of fascism that you saw in Italy. He was fighting for sort of almost a return of monarchical feudalism. And a lot of monarchs entered into alliances with fascists early on. In fact, the first Spanish Republic occurred because the Spanish king was getting deposed, and he went to a general and said, hey, I would like you to rule as the fascist general, and just then let me be king. And the general was like, okay, yeah, great, give me all the power, thanks. Okay, this is the republic now. Which is I love that guy, very smedley.
Well, to get back to an example he used earlier when we addressed Washington. Again, did not do a coup to become president. He wasn't. Yes, fascism is super cringe and not based. But Washington was so dedicated to preserving the republic, such as it was at that point, they actually formed a secret society called the Order of Cincinnatus, which is it's named after Cincinnatus, who was a Roman, kind of just before Sulla, for you Roman history nerds, who actually was given dictatorial power over Rome, fixed whatever the crisis was, I forget what it was, and then went back to his farm and restored the republic. And Washington formed a secret society with a number of continental officers, Baron von Steuben, and a number of prominent politicians, where if the republic during their lifetimes was to establish a monarchy or dictatorship, they would seize power and restore the republic. That's how dedicated those guys were to actually preserving that form of government. And whether that also
explains why Cincinnati is the most wholesome city in the United States.
It's like the only wholesome Roman to seize power. It's amazing.
Cincinnati, by the way, because I've been to Cincinnati several times. I worked up in the area for quite a while. Cincinnati, if you have never been there, there is a remake of the old Babes in Toyland movie from the 90s with Keanu Reeves. And oh
my God, I've seen this.
Yeah, and that guy with the glasses did a review of it, where in the end, the main characters, they defeat the evil person's influence by simply being from Cincinnati and singing the song about Cincinnati. And if you've never been to Cincinnati, you don't understand it, but that actually does make sense, because again, that city is one of the weirdest and most wholesome places on the planet.
I've only ever been to Cleveland, but
Cleveland's a trash fire.
you can actually see me if you go back to, I think it's 2010, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame concert. you can actually see me in the crowd. I'm the dude who jumps up when Metallica comes on stage because I'm around a bunch of boomers who got the front row seats and were very afraid.
You know what? That's one of the great regrets of my life. I've never seen Metallica in concert.
Oh, you got to do it, man.
Yeah, I wanted my dad when I was like 19 years old. My dad drove me several hours to go see this Metallica concert before we went on a vacation, and it turned out we got there the day before the concert. And he was really good about it. You know,
sorry.
We get to the stadium and there's nobody. They're just getting things set up, and I was just like, "Oh, I guess it was tomorrow."
You got to lay off that CBD, brother.
Yeah, well, I was 19. I was not doing CBD. I think that was. But anyway, like the whole point. That was a lot of the reason why I wanted to have the debate, and why I wanted to have it to have a real debate where we would, you know, engage on like more or less good faith terms. Fascism is a really weird thing. And I remember there was a video like up and around the time that, because I've been watching the Distributist's content a little bit, but there was a video that he put out where he did the Umberto Eco thing, and he was trying to read it, and like he was like, well, I don't do that, and I'm just sitting there on the other end of the computer screen like, yeah, because you're not a fascist, Dave. I could have told you that.
Well, you know, at least he was. I'll give him credit where it's due. At least he was self-reflective enough to check.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you know, again, I don't know everything about the community that he built up around him or anything. And, you know, like I said, he's defended people like Black Pigeon Speaks, who is a fascist.
I don't know who that is. And I'm not.
You don't want to know who. Basically, very angry fascist.
Oh, wait. 3 Arrows did a video about him. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He's the one that gets super mad about women being able to choose their partners.
Oh, Lord. You realize I'm going to have to smoke another cigar after this, right?
Oh, yeah. So anyway, like, so I figured this might be a really great opportunity because I think he is genuinely a smart guy. He's gotten suckered into some weird ideology because partially by that freaking dark enlightenment guy, Mendacious or Mandanicus. How the hell do you say that?
Mendacious
Moldbug.
Yeah. Mendacious. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Mendacity. And like, I also watched this video on Mendacious Moldbug because I wanted to. I figured there might be some critiques of democracy in there, because I remember that's the same guy whose philosophy hoodwinked Justine Tooney, who then went on to become some weird dark enlightenment person and wrote a letter. Justine was a fairly prominent activist with Occupy Wall Street, and wrote a letter about how Obama should basically step down as president and appoint the CEO of Google CEO of America. And I remembered like there'd been so many people that had declared Occupy is dead after this, or Occupy will be dead after this, and gone on for like 2 years. And then like I saw that article and I'm just like, yeah, okay. Occupy is dead. It is dead now. No one else could kill it, but this freaking Moldbug guy and Justine killed it.
Jesus. Well, you know, the great thing about movements in a democracy is that once you get enough people who realize
it's Menicus Moldbug.
Menicus Moldbug. Well, you can build new movements with popular consent pretty quick in a democracy. It's much harder in a not democratized system because you don't have the ability to organize as well with the people, and you have the power of the state being actively used against you to do that. So yeah, while Occupy might be dead, the ideas that it contributed to the dialectic are going to create new movements and allow people to be exposed to new ideas who might do other things. And in a structure that's not democratized, you would not have that. In a structure that's not democratized, in a structure that's governed by the hypothetical country squires, like he talked about in the beginning, if the peasants formed Occupy and tried to occupy the squire's estate, he would get the cavalry out to come and slash them with sabers. Yeah. In the United States, where we're theoretically a society based on the consent of the governed, when millions of people start occupying various places throughout the country. Occupy was so big, people think it was only in New York. Down here in Florida, there were Occupy protests going at the time. When that happens, the government that's based on that consent has to respond at least symbolically or somehow.
They have to pretend like they care about us.
Yeah, they do, at least. But, the onus at some point is also in a democracy on us to watch the watchers, because he kept saying who watches the watchers. In a democracy, we all do. Great power comes with great responsibility, the Spider-Man quote. But it's our responsibility as people with the franchise to ensure that the people that we're giving power to are worthy of that power and do a good job with it.
Ironically, the thing that saved us from Trump finally was actually the democratic process. Nothing else could stop that guy.
No, nothing at all, save for a military coup, but thank God it didn't come to that. But you don't want to live in a society based on that either.
No, I definitely do not. It's funny because I did wonder for a while, right after Trump took power, I was like, because he had said that stuff about taking out the terrorists' families and basically, violating the Geneva Convention and all this stuff. And I was just like, if he orders the military to do something like that, are they going to overthrow him or are they going to do it?
There are people in the military who would execute that order. They are such a small minority that it wouldn't be carried out on the massive scale that he wanted it to. And that's what I'll say as somebody who was in that structure.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. And he also, on that note, didn't seem to be familiar with warfare and military science that much. Check out our series that we're doing on Homage to Catalonia, and you'll hear me talk about Clausewitz in great detail. But warfare is politics carried out through violence.
Warfare is politics by other means, which I mentioned in the debate, by the way.
You did. I was like, yeah. But that was my yeah moment in that whole debate. But you don't want to build a structure where you're basing your politics on violence. You want to build a structure through as democratized a means as possible, where your politics are based on consent, and war should be your absolute last resort. And I think that the people that are framing things that there's going to be a war, or we're going to go to war, or we're at war with these other people, are the greatest threat to democracy, because they want to impose through force rather than consent their ideology. And that is an extremely dangerous idea that I'm glad we got some pushback on in this debate. And I think that people should read books like Homage to Catalonia, Time to Love and A Time to Die, All Quiet on the Western Front. These are all great fiction books. You can read people's firsthand accounts of war.
Homage to Catalonia is not a fiction book.
Oh, no. I'm the All Quiet on the Western Front and A Time to Love and A Time to Die are. Homage to Catalonia is a real book. You can read a number of accounts. You can watch documentary movies. You can hear people who have been to war talk about it, and you don't want that to happen, and you don't want that to be in people's heads that the alternative to electoralism is violence. And I think that's a really awful thing to put forward unironically.
I would agree with you, and also, having studied the revolutionary period in Spain as deeply as I do not think we are close to civil war in the United States.
Oh, not at all.
Now, there is, if you listen to Robert Evans' podcast on It Could Happen Here, is hang on, Orwell's journalism is better than his fiction, in my opinion. I agree.
Yeah, 1984 is a seminal work, but you're not wrong.
Yeah. Well, so there is the It Could Happen Here podcast, but really, I think the closest thing that we're going to see out of the far right, because it is this giant cult now that thinks Trump has had the election stolen from him, and you're going to see probably acts of terrorism. But beyond that, I don't think anything could possibly break into something like an actual civil war, because again, you need sections of the military fighting each other, and I don't see that happening.
Yeah, you're right, and I don't think that we really have it in our national character right now to do that. It's not going to happen. There's not the material. There's so many reasons it's not going to happen, but the people who are talking about it happening might inspire those acts of terrorism. So it's really good to push back against that as many places and as vociferously as possible.
Yeah, there is something, by the way, that I wanted to bring up that I didn't get a chance to in the debate, because he talked about the people ruling. He talked about the idea of the people ruling over themselves as incoherent. And when you say it like that, it sounds incoherent, but that's not what it means when people say that.
No, it isn't, and it's really weird. And there's another thing that you're really great to bring that up, because this is a failure of the right wing. Right wing people typically can't envision a scenario in which there isn't a rigid hierarchy. Their thinking is kind of limited in that. So
hence he was bringing up like supposedly the iron law of
oligarchy.
The iron law of oligarchy, which, by the way, is completely unfalsifiable and unscientific. Like, again, it's like I said in the thing, it's true in the sense that nothing is perfect. So obviously there will be some hierarchy. Like, you can't eliminate hierarchy in just the same way you can't eliminate liberty. These are limits. These are not things that can be reached.
Right.
But I wanted to bring that up because I had talked about it directly in my opening statement, that like what we're dealing with when we are dealing with democracy is we're putting our faith in a system that has the backing of evolution, that is, synergy, where beings all contribute to it and create a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And there are better examples of synergy. Again, why I brought up swarm technology, that I think could be adapted to run our societies in a way that is better than both central planning and the chaos of markets. But that's synergy is the people ruling themselves, in that you've contributed to something that is greater than yourself and greater than any individual like member, but is still something that rules over the collective of society.
Yeah, and as we advance in technology, it becomes more and more possible to democratize things. You could make the argument at the founding of the country that more democracy might not have been logistically feasible because of the long communication times and various other things. But now we have telecommunications, we have the internet, we have travel that's infinitely faster than it was back then. We have a culture that's united through kind of a shared Americanism that transcends state lines at this point. These are all factors that allow us to democratize further and include more people in the process. And as we do that, we get more perspectives. We get more people who can be in positions of power in the quote unquote necessary hierarchy that might do a better job than the people in the old ruling class. And that's another strength of democracy, that people who argue against it, I don't know if they don't see it, or if they don't care, or if they think that's a weakness. It's genuinely confusing to me, and that still exists is weird.
I remember something. So when I first started out as a little baby reply guy on the internet, I was on like my first. You remember those old forums before Web 2.0? Like,
bro, I remember Usenet.
Okay, yeah. So when I was on my old forum, like my old webcomic forums or something, one of the things, and this was like around the time that I think the prequels were coming out or had been out for a couple of years. I remember it being repeated on my forum, like as common knowledge, that the best form of government is benevolent dictatorship. And a bunch of webcomic nerds in high school sitting around talking like that.
Well, it kind of, the comic, at that time, the comic trope kind of did lend itself to that a little bit, because you have like Batman, the benevolent like ruler and protector of Gotham City. You have Superman, the protector of the earth. It kind of does lead into that. So I can see where they would think, yes, using that as a stone tablet. You're not wrong. It was probably quicker to actually carve a stone tablet than do a Usenet post.
Yeah, but the point is that people seem, when they think about these types of governments, they think of them as static. Because like, as I pointed out, I was like, even if you get like the best possible ruler that you could, and you give them absolute power and they wield that power, responsibly, okay, great, you get one. And then whoever occupies it after them is not going to be as good. Now we had this comment. I'm not 100% sure what he's referring to, but maybe you can respond to this, Bobby.
Yeah, so that's kind of something that happens in debate a lot, is that the interlocutor, I can't pronounce that word. The two debaters, those will single out one point to argue against that will highlight the strength of their argument and the weakness of the opponent's argument. And because of the time constraints of debate, they probably won't address every point, and they'll always address what they see as the weaker point in somebody else's argument. That necessarily isn't something that's dishonest about him. That's just something that's kind of a flaw of the medium.
Yeah, you can't respond to everything, and it's really difficult to keep everything in your mind. So, you kind of want to seize on something and then keep going. Now, Bobby, I want to ask you something here because, do you feel like we talked a little bit about how I didn't want this debate to be a blood sport, and I wanted to engage in good faith with him and listen, and really, come in with this. Do you feel that there were any times that I was perhaps too gracious? Was I ever too good? No.
I'm less nice than you are when it comes to this kind of thing. I would have pushed him a little bit harder on the immigration thing. I think that needed to be pushed a little bit harder. And I think that instead of, I don't want to sound condescending, instead of humoring his talking points about property and stuff, I think it would have been more productive to go into what his alternative to democratization was. Other than that, though, I think it was better to do it as a conversation the way you did, because you're more likely to reach his audience with the flaws of not having democracy and the weakness of his argument than you are yelling at him. Because if you're yelling at him, there people who listen to him are going to feel like their community is under attack and be more defensive. But the way you did it, I think, actually worked out very well. Cool. The only thing is I would have pushed a little harder on the immigration thing, because I think that kind of thinking leads to very, very bad politics in our country. I think that needs to be pushed really hard. Not only our country, all countries, but I'm most familiar, obviously, with the United States as an American.
Well, it was interesting to find out that he was from a family of fairly recent immigrants, and we were both immigrants from Eastern Europe. Like, this is something that, like, when I read my family history that my grandmother had written down before she died, and I was saying in the debate, and I think it was actually my great grandmother, my great great grandmother gave birth to my great-grandmother, like, in a field in the Carpathian Mountains, and wrapped her in a towel and took her into the house. And presumably immediately went back to working.
So are you telling me that you're the bad guy from the Left Behind series? Because I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying is that so going from that to my son being born in one of the best hospitals in New York City in the span of 5 or 6 generations. Like, I cannot look at someone who wants to come here and say, no, you're not allowed in. In much the same way, like, my grandmother specifically cited the reason our family was able to come here was because immigration laws were relaxed in the United States.
Right. And the free movement of people allows us to not have what he was talking about, like, we need to have our territory here and your territory here in a very thin line dividing it or whatever. But the free movement of people and resources is what allows us to, in a lot of cases, avoid people conquering other territories for more people and more resources. So you're right. When you look at somebody who wants to come here, who genuinely actually wants to come here, or somebody who's coming here for economic opportunity or because of economic or economic or natural forces that are forcing them to move, and say no, it just doesn't make sense with the system that we've set up, and it doesn't make sense from a moral perspective either, any coherent moral perspective that's extant in our society now.
Yeah. Now, we had some questions here. So from Chaos Espada, who was the guy you referenced in the debate when you were talking about democratic alternatives? It sounds like you said Yochai Blanket. Yeah, that's Yochai Benkler. I put him into the thing, and yeah, it does sound like it's fine. I hear it as Yochai. Here we go. Yeah, he's a professor at Harvard. It's Benkler, and I love that his name sounds like Japanese demon banker. It's like the absolute opposite. I heard about him from Non-Compete, and he's done some really, really interesting work. So please do check him out. So we've also got here. Let's see. We've got the one guy in chat who wanted you to go a lot harder. Well, yes, there was that one guy in chat. I referred to that guy earlier, who was like, yeah, he was a Vosh fan, and he was like, why isn't this exactly like the debate I saw with Vosh? And I was just like, can't you just go watch that debate again?
Yeah, YouTube exists, bro.
It's on. I'm not Vosh. So here we go. For clarification, there's a few times you would describe how democracy would address a problem, and in the process talk about something, for example, scaling down community size. Oh, and then he would say, well, that's not democracy. Yeah. Sorry, Robert, you go.
No, that's a great point. But again, that's a flaw of the medium, and I think we addressed that earlier. But yeah, the no true democracy thing and the no true capitalism thing and the no true socialism thing is something that's annoyingly common in debate.
Why are you not Vosh?
Well, you're not a redhead, and I've never seen you.
Someone just screenshot this and send it to me. Because like I love that. I think I might make that my next profile picture if someone's able to do that.
OMG, why are you not Vosh? My God.
Or you know what? I could make that the background on my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So anyway, Bobby, so this has been great. We've been at it for an hour and a half, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. So do you want to plug your pluggables?
Yeah, so I have been really inactive lately because of the holidays. I've been kicking my behind. But I am the Mustache Mafia YouTube channel. I'm the Mustache Mafia on SoundCloud. I'm Mustache Bob 2 on Twitter. I promise going to edit a book club I did about Frank Herbert's Dune this week. I'm trying to record some more of those with a couple of friends. But yeah, you can check me out there. And he has beard and hair. I have beard and hair, and I'm not Vouch. I'm much
everyone is Vouch.
Everyone, we are all Vouch. And
it's going to be like that episode of Doctor Who where like the master turns everyone in the world into the master. Okay. And it'll be Vouch. Everyone will have a man bun.
You could have referenced The Matrix, but you went for Doctor Who. That's all right.
Okay, yes, but agents. I feel like the actual result of Vouch inhabiting every human being's body would be closer to the Master than Agent Smith. Agent Smith has a sinisterness to him.
Vouch doesn't manage it. Yeah, I was asked by a mutual acquaintance of ours to tell you to watch The Expanse, and that you're a heretic for not doing it.
Busy.
I told him I would on Twitter, so I am now. And you are a heretic, and you're filthy, filthy awful. But
I gotta get back to it. I did start to watch The Expanse, but the issue was that my wife didn't like it, and it was kind of slow. I will go back to it, but also I'm going to remind you, BZ, that I told you to watch Hunter x Hunter, and you started and you were like, "Oh, this is just anime bullshit," and you turned it off. So maybe if you push a little harder on Hunter x Hunter, I will push harder on The Expanse.
It gets better after Papa Bezos takes it over and it goes to Amazon. They can drop the F-bomb.
Yeah. Oh God.
Civil war.
Yeah. So anyway, by the way, I almost brought this up in the thing because at some point I was like, no, it might not be a good idea to send the police after criminals always, and he was like, blah, 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 blah.
It's an implicit attempt to take over the government. No, it isn't.
And I wanted to point this out because, like, Destiny, one of the people, and I really want to debate Destiny on his moral system because it is monstrous. And like, if you remember when he was like losing his mind over the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, and like he was up there like sketching, like, oh, it's gonna be like this, and this is how my morals work. Like, and he said like it's permissible to kill someone over a stick of gum if they try to take it from you.
The only two things I know him from are that kill somebody over a stick of gum, please don't do that. No law in the country is okay with you murdering somebody over a stick of gum. And him trying to take the LSAT, and like both make me question my faith in humanity that he has such a huge following.
Yeah, well, Destiny. What I will say for him is he's clearly a very skilled rhetorician, and he's very good at sounding like he knows what he's talking about, even when what he's talking about is batshit insane. But I loved it also because there was like this weird thing when I don't know if you saw the initial thumbnail when he was doing the Destiny's moral system, but it was literally like, I don't even remember exactly what the thing that appeared at was, but like it was one of the things where I'm like, am I living in the Matrix? Because the thumbnail on the video where he explains his moral system literally implied he was completely losing his mind. And I'm like, you made that. Why would you?
the utter hubris of somebody to think that on a live stream they can coherently outline a system of morality on the fly is one of the most hilarious things I've seen in a while. Also, Chaos Espada, man, you got to upgrade from the Espada to the Rapier and go on like the Destreza. Like that's much better fencing. That's all I'm going to say.
Now he's good. My moral system is the political equivalent of Calvin Ball. Calvin Ball is amazing.
yeah, fair enough. At least you're honest.
I think you've just described chaotic neutral alignment.
Yeah, pretty much.
You can probably bully your way onto his stream. That's what Vaush did. Just bully my way onto Destiny's stream. Be like, Destiny, I'm going to talk with you about your morals now.
It's morality time. That joke kind of probably didn't land. There was a gentleman here who I'll leave you guys with a funny little aside about living in Florida. There was a Popeye's chicken that was closing here for the night, and the manager and her boyfriend were leaving, and all of a sudden they hear a shotgun rack behind them, and this guy goes, "It's chicken time." And he forced them at gunpoint to walk back into the KFC Popeyes and cook him like $700 worth of chicken. And then he left without taking any money. So for the rest of my life, I'm always going to be like, it's blank time, because I really want to know what happened to that dude.
That's incredible. Yeah. You can duck out, Bobby. If you want to stick around, I'm not going to make you or blame you. I'm not kicking you out, but I just there was some questions that were off topic that I wanted to answer. So
I've got all night, man.
Okay, great. So if you want to hang on, there's this one other thing. I want to see if this guy is still in. So Evie Sidey, are you still here, or have you gone to bed or whatever? I'm guessing Evie Sidey is not here anymore, but I am going to try and address this question that kind of came up earlier, and this was sort of a let me see if I can find some more of the stuff that was said. There's too much neoliberal wokeness in your swag, meaning my swagger, not the literal swag that I have.
What?
And and Caleb avoids this better. So, and then finally we have right here, woke capital has hijacked your mind and giving you a faux morality. All right, so I'm going to address this. Bobby, do you want to say anything before I do?
You're like, I know neoliberals. I hang around neoliberals. Brenton is an anarchist, which is almost the polar opposite of neoliberals. The man doesn't believe in capitalism. He doesn't believe in the state. He doesn't believe in the neoliberal concept of the end of history. If I forced him to read Fukuyama's End of History and The Last Man, he would probably throw it at me, and I would deserve it because that's an awful book. The dude does live streams with the person that you mentioned being better at avoiding neoliberalism than he does. No, he's not a neoliberal. I'm closer to being a neoliberal than he is, and I'm called like a raging socialist by the neoliberals that I know. Mm-hmm. No, incorrect, wrong.
And if you want to see like neoliberals, look at the debate that American Johnson and I did against Layman and Splinters. Those guys are neoliberals, and they're actually on the left end of neoliberalism. They're not as monstrous as most of them, but even I remembered at one point in the debate they were like, "So you're saying that somehow socialism favors human life above capitalism. Just like, yes,
yes, it does.
that's the whole point.
There's 250 years almost of philosophy to back that up.
Yeah. Now this person was polite after that, so I don't want to drag them through the mud too much, and I especially don't want to talk about someone who's not here.
No, I'm sure they're a fine person, but they're wrong.
But don't let. Oh yeah, hang on. Don't let the Nosballs get you down for supporting human rights. Yeah. Now, I still contend that Nosballs don't exist. So this is kind of the thing that, and I've heard this out of a lot of fascists. Like when Caleb and I debated Stryker and Enoch, and I use debate very loosely there. There's a reason why I don't call the version of that on my channel a debate, and neither does Caleb. It's Brent and Caleb's crazy screaming match with Nazis. Like, the alt-right will use this thing where they say that a person's moral convictions, any moral convictions they have, are a result of them being brainwashed by the culture industry.
Well, they don't believe in the culture industry. They believe in the 3 parentheses people who control culture. Yeah. So they ran the guy who invented the concept of the culture industry out of Germany. So that's something that's kind of important to kind of note.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. And so, like, when you argue with these like fascists, they will put forth this idea that, you know, if you are not sufficiently radical in the way they want you to be radical, that is the 3 parentheses culture industry, or that controlling your mind in the same way that you might see someone Nosball or you know, kind of that is an alt-right argument in the mouth of a leftist or of a presumed leftist, because they seem to be a fan of Caleb's. The thing is that there are, as we've said, identifiable neoliberal ideals, and there are. I simply don't have those neoliberal ideals. I don't support private property. I don't support capitalism. I don't support the existence of the state, which is to say, I think we should get rid of the military and police and replace them with a better institution that does not have the culture that they have. So like, yeah, no, I'm sorry. Like, and the fact that I support, for instance, you know, the rights of minorities and trans people, and the fact is that so does Caleb. Caleb marched for freaking trans rights 10 years ago, like more than 10 years ago, like 10 years before trans rights were even a thing in most people's eyes. Caleb was in the street fighting for that and putting his life and freedom and body on the line for them. And this really is one of the things that has frustrated me about some of the attempts to undermine Caleb's character, is because now this is out in the ether, and there are people that seem to unironically support treating trans people like garbage that are now citing Caleb when he does not say or believe anything of the kind. So
I think Caleb runs into a problem in that when he tries to address those people, in that he kind of walks into the Coliseum and looks at the columns.
Yes, I will agree with that 150%. Caleb has been Sideshow Bob stepping on a rake after a rake. Yeah. In a number of ways in how he's handled certain things, and we've talked about that.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that any amount of wokeness that I may experience, in the sense that I support the struggle of trans rights, I support the struggles of minority rights, is a consequence of my anarchism. Yep. I believe everyone is equal, and everyone has an equal right to to autonomy and the fruits of the earth. And as a result, I am going to support stuff like Black Lives Matter. I'm going to support trans rights. I'm going to say trans women are women. And I'm going to say that not simply because I believe it, but because I know it, because I've actually read the science on it. They're women. I've done the underlying philosophical work as well. If you don't think that they're women, I'm sorry, you don't understand gender. And in much the same way that if you think that someone's gender is set by their biological sex, or that the human biological sex is an on-off switch, you're just wrong. You are out of step with the scientific consensus ideology aside.
Well, I think the problem that we run into there, and this could be a whole nother stream. One, I don't think woke is actually a thing. I think it's just a word that people use when they're uncomfortable with people asking for their civil rights. But two, I think the problem that you just highlighted with the whole gender thing is it's more of a Wittgenstein problem of language, where people don't understand the academia because it's not disseminated in a way that people understand anymore.
Yeah.
And we run into that headlong. I think as it becomes more mainstreamed in our culture, we're going to see a lot of that anxiety go away, although we're always going to have bigots, unfortunately.
Well, anxiety. So the academic language. There's a reason why academic language is so inaccessible and so difficult. Yeah. And it's academics controlling their power. They make it so the average person cannot pick up a academic paper and read it and understand it, because if you could pull a Goodwill Hunting and just go to the library and read their papers and get the education. Yeah. But you have to pay them and go through their institutions and justify their power if they keep it inaccessible. It's the same reason why academics absolutely hate Wikipedia. Yeah. And like, you can't even bring it up around an academic, but they lose their minds.
Well, the other thing too is that in capitalism, we see this a lot, but we're seeing it in academia too, is that you see replication in small communities. And as academics use more and more esoteric language, we see them replicating that to get published in journals. Yeah. And it gets worse and worse over time. Being in Nothingness is a great book by Jean-Paul Sartre. You referenced it in the debate, actually, when you said being precedes essence. It's Sartre.
Yeah, existence precedes essence.
Yeah. I messed up? Sorry. But that was a bestseller in like the 40s and 50s. That's kind of still a hard book to read, but it was a bestseller. Camus was a bestseller, and these are still considered kind of titans of existential philosophy. But now, if you try to pick up like a quote unquote serious philosophical work, you're going to run into so much jargon that it's difficult for someone who's not steeped in the field to understand it. I think that's a serious problem that needs to be addressed in philosophy.
Well, also, so words, what people don't understand is that words and the language that you use, it's not simply about expressing ideas, but also identifying things. Yeah. So like, for instance, if I come in here and I start talking about like dialectical materialism, you might think that I am I might be a Marx-Leninist. Yeah. If I start talking about solidarity, I'm some sort of leftist activist. If I start using terms like deformed workers' state, I'm a trot. It's a way of flag waving. So certain bits of language and certain terms can be used by people to indicate that they are within the same community. And so that's done in a lot of ways. And you even mentioned it, Bobby, with the fact that a lot of the jargon is to make sure that like the people that submit to these journals are real academics, because they speak like a real academic as opposed to someone else.
And it's a serious problem because we have a population. I saw somebody reference economics, and yeah, that's also a problem, economics. But we have a population, especially in the United States, that's functionally philosophically illiterate. And that is a serious problem because it gets people to be susceptible to these like weird chud YouTubers and people arguing against democracy. I'm not saying Distributist is a chud, but people who are arguing against democracy, I don't think so either. But you get people susceptible to Ben Shapiro as the cool kids philosopher who is just spouting movement conservatism, and you don't have a population that's steeped enough in understanding philosophy, political philosophy specifically in that case, or moral philosophy or any sort of philosophy, to understand that the guy's kind of an idiot.
Ben Shapiro,
as an example, but
very quickly, and you notice he never debates anybody with any kind of chops. Like but most of the modern day debate, much of the regular modern day debaters, not even some of the better ones, could probably chew Ben Shapiro up and spit him out. He only goes after like college students with no media training.
College students with no media training that have like 3 seconds to ask him a question. Do I believe? No, you know what? That's a good question. No, I don't think so. I don't know what Brenton's feelings are, but I think that it is something that you have to remember, that conservatives will ally themselves with fascists. Look at what happened in Weimar Germany. The conservatives thought the fascists would be the foot soldiers of the conservative movement, but they were eaten alive by them. Libertarians have really bad history in this country of justifying fascism, like Pinochet's fascism, if it serves their ideological ends. That said, there are movement conservatives that aren't fascists. There are a lot of libertarians who are anti-fascists. And it doesn't necessarily lead them down that road, but as you go further and further right, you go further and further towards that, and I think you become more susceptible to it. But no, it doesn't lead to it inevitably.
Yeah, I would agree with that analysis of fascism, because fascism is not a real political ideology in the sense that liberalism is a real political ideology. Communism, like Marxism, is a real political ideology. Anarchism is a real political ideology. I'm not simply saying this because these are ideologies that I like more than fascism. It's that these are ideologies that have like actual set solid ideas behind them. Fascism does not. It's more of almost an aesthetic that takes on that, and it's especially like when they say that fascism is liberal capitalism in decay. Yes. So what seems to happen with fascist movements historically is that as capitalism begins to implode, you have two, usually, and there could be more, but these are the two that have traditionally vied for power as capitalism breaks down. You have socialism, which is a means of organizing society based on class. And then you also have fascism, which is a means of organizing society based upon race and nationality. And what happens is that as because capitalism, of course, a means of organizing society based upon finances and access to capital. So as that breaks down and the ruling class loses, I guess, faith in its ability to maintain their privileges, they see the socialists, they get scared, and they see the fascists, who are essentially people who've been driven mad by the idea that everyone from king to peasant is equal. And they say to themselves, oh, here are some foot soldiers, here are some idiots that I can give power to who will put down these socialists and stop it. And the struggle goes back and forth and back and forth. And I think that ultimately socialism is the force that is going to win that struggle, whether we win it gradually through persuasion or we're eventually pushed into a revolutionary situation, because fascism, fortunately and unfortunately, is incredibly self-defeating. And I really believe that Tolkien was right when he talked about how evil is ultimately a self-defeating force. Fascists take power. Their only real ideology is we should have power and we should be brutal and exercise that power with as much force as we possibly can, and against all of the people who deserve it. And that people who deserve it that circle gets smaller and smaller and smaller the more power they gain.
There's a really disturbing film that you can watch that illustrates that very well. It's called Conspiracy. HBO made it, I think, in like 2001. They actually had the Wannsee conference where they planned the Holocaust, and they kept a stenographic record because the Germans can't help themselves. But they actually they really can't. But they took the stenographic record and a couple of people's recollections of it, and they actually just acted out exactly what they said at the conference. And you see what Brenton's talking about, and you see like the disturbing kind of banality of fascism acted out in this film. And there, it's a meeting. It's a meeting, but about 45 minutes into the film, you're going to sit there and be like, oh my God, they're really going to do this. And, it's just a great film to watch about fascism that doesn't involve tanks blowing other stuff up. But
I like tanks blowing stuff up, but I will check that.
I do too. Well, right after that, watch Downfall, because you get to watch Hitler shoot himself.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Get rid of your nation's military is a great way to leave yourself vulnerable to attack by foreign nation states. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's totally true, which is why I think it's world revolution or nothing.
Yeah.
And also, I think that there will be some institution that replaces the military. I just, again, I feel like in much the same way that you need a clean break from the previous police departments that we've had in this country because of the way they are structured and the culture that is boiled into them. I think ultimately, when we are to move beyond the state structure, we need a clean break from the state, which is not to say that there won't ever be an institution for, leveling violence when it is necessary.
And everything changes over time. Our institution of policing in the military is vastly different than it was in, say, 1900. But, the choice is going to be, and this will reference some current popular culture direct that I'm consuming, it's kind of between reforming it along left lines, or we wind up like Night City in Cyberpunk 2077. And you don't really want that. Or it's a choice between like Starship Troopers Regimented Fascist Society and Star Trek's like automated space communism, where everyone like paints on the Starship Enterprise. And I picked the left one personally.
There's a couple more great comments here.
Yeah.
So my cousin is trans and she has a YouTube channel. Search for Grizno. Everybody do that.
Give it a shot. Subscribe to my channel and her channel. Not in that order, maybe.
And Bobby's channel is linked in the description here. And then I think the final thing that I have here, unless anybody else wants to, Ben Shapiro came to my school once and yelled at me.
You should have just taken his lunch money, man.
Yeah, given him a wedgie and taken his lunch money. What's funny about Ben Shapiro, by the way,
what's that?
Is he wanted to be a screenwriter.
Oh, I heard about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and he wrote that garbage novel. But Ben Shapiro basically wanted to be me.
I haven't read his novel, but I did read Steven Seagal's novel, and I kind of want to read Ben Shapiro's now to see which one's worse.
There's so if you go to Behind the Bastards,
yeah, I heard their podcast about it.
Yeah, they do a number of readings of that, and Robert Evans does really good work in general. I really one of these days I will meet Robert Evans, and my friend has interviewed him previously, and he's in a weird way had a huge impact on me because I was reading Cracked before I was an anarchist, and I wonder if he somehow bread pilled me because I found out after being an anarchist for years that Robert Evans was an anarchist. I'm like, oh,
sneaky.
All right, guys. So this has been Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, Bobby B of the 5x5 podcast. Thank you all so much for coming out. And Bobby, thanks for staying extra long here. And I will catch you guys on the flip side. From Callum Arnold. Hey, Brenton. Hey, Callum.
Bye, Callum.
Bye, Callum. As we leave, good to see you all. And please, by the way, I'm putting this again into the chat here. Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. 8 a.m. tomorrow is the it's Eastern time is when this Kickstarter closes. We're getting very close. We're within $3,000 of the final stretch goal. Please, it's not a lot of money. And you're getting in on the series on the ground floor, and all that stuff is going to go back into the series and into creating issue 4 and 5 and 6 down the line. So I'm not just simply running up the scoreboard here. I really want to make sure that we finish strong. So thank you all so much. And I will catch you on the flip side.